we should follow when applying TDD to real world projects. And this is a very broad topic and a topic of great importance because, for us to ship reliable software in production, the TDD frameworks offers us the most comprehensive approach to doing reliable software development. So it's a very, very broad topic, very, very interesting topic. And then to take us through this, we have Nacho Kugel, who joins us today. Nacho is a principal software engineer and Java champion with rich experience in leading teams and managing software projects. Nacho has worked in different roles in the IT world, and he is what you would call a guy for everything kind of a developer. And he's a team leader, project manager, CTO, and he has seen the length and breadth of software engineering. Nacho loves to share his knowledge with other people, and he is therefore a frequent speaker at tech conferences. And he spends as much time learning for other people. And he has this passion to write clean code, and is very passionate about extreme programming, things like testing, TDD, refactoring, pair programming, whatever makes programming productive and efficient. And he values simplicity, respect, communication, etc. And for those of you who come from the Java world, it would be interesting to hear that Nacho is the founder of the Barcelona Java user group. So with that, I would like to turn this back to Nacho and welcome him to this webinar and have him start the session.
Over to you. So thank you very much for the introduction. It is my pleasure to be here with you. Yeah, so let me share my screen. And let's check if you can see it properly. I hope so.
Yes, we can.
Okay, so thank you. Here we go. So first thing first, thank you for having me. Thank you, Starof Java, for being so nice to invite me to have this session. And thank you for all the people that are will be seeing the session. So thank you very much. Many people approach to me, why this session? Do we need actually this session? And I think it makes a bit of sense to just to have a kind of a recap of what's the basic around TDD, understanding also the benefits around why doing the test before doing the production code, and then doing the other way around, and see the benefits of understanding and doing one way or another. I hope I will be able to share some tips about how I normally approach to drive and develop via TDD. And also I will try to share a live coding example where people will actually understand much better how to do these kind of things in more real, let's say, example. So please don't run away. That's more or less the idea. Even if your face is like this, please do not run away. Yeah, as you introduced, as Hashi introduced me, I'm a principal software engineer. I'm working at Dynatrace, and we are an application performance monitoring service. So basically, we build software to monitor all the software, which is, I would say, cool. And I'm always a fan of writing the better code I could. And I started to write code more than 25 years ago, more or less. And yes, I'm the founder of Barcelona Java user group, and also the founder of DevBCN. The JVG, Java Barcelona Conference has been renamed to Developers Barcelona Conference, another great conference. If you come to Barcelona, that I would recommend you to have a look. And yeah, it became Java champion, and I like very much to go with my family and to play sports, running, and all these kind of things. And I normally try to share my thoughts, etc., around TDD, etc., from time to time with Twitter, X, or Mastodon. So if you want to follow me, I will try to actually reply you if I have any questions. So the first warning is about everything I'm going to share is based on my personal experience, based on what I learned, and based on what I'm normally following different examples, different projects, and different, let's say, results. So take this into account. About the agenda of this session, I prepare, let's say, a bit of introduction about where this TDD came from, some of the advantages or disadvantages about applying TDD, the main process, how it works, how it is designed, and also some good habits about what I normally use for applying using TDD. And I will also come with the last part with this live coding example, and then the final recap. So let's go with first start, understanding where it comes from, and also the advantages and disadvantages. So TDD is not a brand new stuff. I mean, it's actually from the 90s, where Ken Beck, let's say, rediscovered this mechanism where he was working at Chrysler. He was working on a big project, a big company, trying to understand how the teams and people can actually deliver software faster. And he discovered this process to deliver code while writing the test first. And so it was like a long time ago where this mechanism started to be a thing. And after some years later, he wrote a book, let's say the Bible, the very well famous test-driven development by example from Ken Beck. So basically, this is from the, let's say, 90s, where still we had, you know, these kind of big machines where the process were long time and complicated to build, but still, so this is a mechanism where it started during that time. So nothing really brand new. And probably many of you know, but for the people that doesn't know, TDD has primarily two main schools, the Chicago one and the London one. The Chicago one is the main, let's say, described by Ken Beck. And the more idea is that your code is gonna appear, let's say, by doing some changes. So basically, when you refactor, when you change your code, the things are gonna emerge by changing your actual, let's say, the code. So for example, if you have some duplications, you have to remove some encapsulations, you have to change, then your code is gonna be, let's say, emerging from that area. So basically, when you realize that you have to do some changes, then your code is gonna be, let's say, applying mainly this mechanism. And it's more focused on the states and returning values from functions. So it's a more, let's say, primarily way of applying TDD. And while the other approach, the London one, is more focused on acceptance tests. So basically, you are going to be applying TDD from what we call top to down, basically from the outside of your system, going down into everything that you might need in your internals of your system. And then the focus is more on the interactions with the components on the elements. And that's why here appears the idea of messages. And when it appears the idea of messages, components that send messages to via objects or classes, then you have the idea of the concept about mock objects. Then here's when the mock objects appear. Well, for a moment, I will invite you to, let's say, put yourself in an imagined world, well, where we can actually identify a few different things, just for a moment, right? So imagine, for example, a process that helps you to deliver software in a straightforward way, no, an incremental and iterative progress way, in a more, let's say, faster feedback loop. This is one of the ideas that comes with TDD. You will also find defects earlier when you are running or designing your tests versus when you have your code running in production, which is a complete, let's say, different approach, right? And also you will find detect regressions errors easy because you are already designing your test, and you will find something that is not gonna work before arriving to any step further. And your software, because of this bunch of tests that you're going to create, you're going to have more, let's say, more security about yourself. So you're going to have more possibilities to refactor your code because you will have a safety net built on top of more tests. Let's continue imagining this world, right? Where your software, let's say, guides you how a consumer will use your component. Something is going to, let's say, use your component you're going to use, and basically those things are going to exactly the test that you're already creating. And for this reason, your tests are going to be living documentation, really something that you will always change because you will have a different specification. You might have to change these tests, etc. And because of those reasons, the software you're going to write is likely to have less bugs. And for that same reason, your development cost will be lower. I already included here two links about this as articles. Well, this is a case study. One is a case study about IBM from the 90s, no, from 2000, if I'm not wrong, where they found that teams are getting 40% fewer defects when using TDD. And another is a group of articles where they analyze the effort versus the need of applying TDD, and when, depending on the area and the type of company and organization, it makes sense to apply TDD in one way or another, or basically see which kind of empirical studies on TDD works in that way or another. But probably you will say, okay, Nacho, but then you are, let's say, telling me, right, that TDD is actually solving all my problems, right? And this is not actually true. TDD has some disadvantages, I would say, and some of them are really clear. It's not so easy to start with, and there are not too many places to help. So majority of the people doesn't know where to start, and it's really difficult to start. It has a high learning curve, and it actually depends on how complexity your code is, and how good are you in terms of the engineering capabilities, and at the same time, how good are you in designing software. So it can be, again, a large investment in your team, depending on how experienced your team members are, because it requires time and effort to dedicate and to invest on building something that it might require first to understand how I can write a test to cover it by test. So yes, it's easy as well. It's easy to forget, especially if you are not in an environment or a team that does not encourage you to use it, or you cannot experiment with it comfortably. Imagine, because you have in a rush, you have pressures to deliver things, probably is not the best environment where you can actually deliver a code that is already created, designed by test, if you don't have enough experience to do it. So it provokes resistance, and so people, if they try already and didn't work for them, probably many of the people say, okay, this is not for me, this is not for the code that we have in production, and probably that's the reason why many people is not happy with it. And can be, of course, corrupted and lead to the syndrome of reaching, let's say, a high level of coverage that is possible. And it's not really true. So the idea is that having a high level of coverage is an indirect consequence of using and applying TDD, because you are writing always the test first, you're going to have higher level of code coverage, but it's not on the way around. So at the end, it's extremely difficult to master it because of all of these reasons that I mentioned. So probably you will have your face like this. Oh, how does it look like? I don't understand how this works, right? So probably many of you who are listening and attending the session, you will know you have learned to write code some time ago, like riding a bicycle, right? So how it is, I normally use this analogy for explaining how TDD is, and I normally use this analogy about riding a bicycle because I think it's a kind of a different approach. Just imagine that you have to learn how you write your code, but in a different way. Imagine you have to learn a different bicycle, sorry, but being older. It's gonna be more difficult for you. It's gonna be a bit more complicated to put yourself in same position. But you remember, you learn a few things, just have to remove some of those things and then think in a different way. And at the end, TDD 6 was looking for designing your component and your elements in kind of a self-contained boxes where you can actually replace some boxes with others and building better modelized software and tested software, which is a great idea at the end of the objective, to be able to then replace every single box with the other things that you might need. So now we have finished let's say, the main block about where it comes from and the advantages. Let me explain a little bit about the process. Probably many of you have seen this diagram, this cycle. This is actually the cycle about TDD, and it's not that more than that. Basically, you have to start with the first step, writing a test that is in red, let's say, seeing that the test is failing. We would like to implement something. First, we write a test that we can see that is failing. The second step is, okay, just let's write the minimum thing that we can do for solving that, and then to be able to pass the test. And the third one is, okay, let's have a picture that we have right now with your code. Now we can see that the functionality is solved, how we can improve it. It is possible to change it somehow because it doesn't look like we expect. So more or less, those are the steps that those are the steps that we have to follow applying TDD. So more or less, it's like on the first step, specify what we want to code. It's like, this is the desire that we want to achieve, right? And the first thing, see that this is not already implemented, execute that test and see the test is read, and then write the minimum thing that we can do for covering. Let's say creating just enough code to satisfy the desired behavior. Just make it work, basically. And then the third one is the refactor one. So clean our code and see if there are some duplications, if we can do it better, if there's something we can, let's say, improve somehow. This is mainly the process about TDD. Red, green, refactor. Those are the three steps that everybody understands or remembers. So let's continue with the next step. That should be good habits. As we are working, normally in different, let's say, projects and different companies, I will recommend you always to start by a little. Start in different katas, different examples, different elements or proof of concept and personal project where you can actually play with it and practice. It's a matter of practicing and see how it works. You have to internalize yourself until you're able to, doesn't matter let's say the type of problem that you can have, that you will always be able to understand that first you have to write the test and then go later on to production code. I will recommend you always to practice with somebody else. For the ones that doesn't know, it's called pair programming. I will explain in a minute. And also to keep learning, read some online, some books, and also see some online content about pair programming. Probably many of you know that, but it's for the ones that doesn't know, it's an extreme programming practice. As the picture you can see it, so where more than one person is involved. So normally you have two persons, one is the driver, another is the navigator, and those two persons are actually at the same time reviewing the code and working with the code. So basically one person is just basically typing, the one is driving, and the other one is the observer. So the observer basically looks for the overall picture, while the one that is writing is basically focused on the actual thing that we have to implement. With this idea and this back and forth, the idea is that those roles, they have to be swapped. And because of this reason, the test and the code is going to be improved by every single step that we are going to do. And with this, we are going to increase the feedback. And because of that, the mechanism is going to help you to review and to enrich your system much better than, let's say, the other static review pull request. So the idea is that it has to be, let's say, the focus on having possibility to having tactical aspects on one way, and the other ways to go straight for the solution that we want to apply. And because of those roles are going to be switching, this feedback will increase, let's say, the quality of the solution because of this, let's say, swapping of roles and positions. It's really interesting. I will recommend you to also apply when trying to work with TDD, because it's going to help you to understand much better how this works. Or recommended content, I always recommend few, let's say, first start with the concepts. Martin Fowler has a really nice book and a really nice, let's say, blog about it. And also Dave Farley and James Shore and Jason Gorman, they have a really nice YouTube channels where you can actually see concepts from, I don't know, continuous integration, TDD, etc. And also see some series like James Shore and Jason Gorman have for following how a process or a program can actually be implemented and increase or upgrade from one thing to another without without problems, let's say, but working with TDD. And you will see how to jump from one idea to another. And from, let's say, books perspective, I always recommend some of those that you can see here. Normally, I will recommend you start with Growing Object-Oriented Software Guided by Test by Steve Freeman and Nat Price. Probably the other two that I most recommend are the Test-Driven Development and Practical Guide. This one is more focused on examples with graphical user interfaces or another real examples. And the last one probably is the Test-Driven Development by Example by Ken Beck. Probably is a basic introduction, but a bit idealized in my opinion, but it still is still valid. The last one I recommend is The Art of Unit Testing. Even it's for C# developers, it's really easy to read, not more focused on TDD, to be honest. So remember that we're talking about good habits, about technical stuff that they can recommend you. The first thing is to, before writing the production code, see that your test is failing. You will see when you're used to TDD that is one of the things that normally people miss, and is one of the things that is important to review. Because if you cannot see that this test is failing, probably this thing that you are going to implement is already implemented. So first, check if this test is in red. If not, you can probably remove it. And one of the things that I always recommend you is to check that for every single test, you have only one reason to fail. This is one of the reasons why understanding how a test is working one area or another, it will help you a lot if you have only one reason to fail. And also, I always recommend to write the assertion first. I will show you in a minute how to do that. So one of the tips I always recommend you is to follow a different naming convention where writing your test. So I normally try to end up my classes with my test classes under the suffix should. And with this approach, I have always to force myself and my colleagues to start describing an action, which means what we can do, what we have to do, what these classes have to, let's say, fulfill. And with this way, we are describing behavior And with this approach, we only need to describe the expected behavior in English, which means I don't want to implement or describe the internal details. And it can be explained in plain English, which is really cool because everybody can then later on read what this test or what this classes is trying to do. And if we try to collapse those tests, you will see actually has a kind of a summary of what kind of behavior we have already, which means it doesn't mean that you might need to understand exactly what this, in this case, session, replay, resource, whatever is doing, but at least I know which kind of behavior is already covered. And the tests with that approach are more clear. And if sometimes fails, of course, we can go and have a look on the detail of that. But from the perspective of going outside, let's say, in understanding much better the picture, we have a better understanding without going into the details, without no much complexity and with a less cognition problems with cognition and understanding what we have to do. And we don't need to go to the technical details if we don't want. I mentioned before about the creation order or the assertion first. I will explain you a little bit how I normally do the creation, the order creation. So first, of course, I create the name of the class. Then later I create the method, the test that we want to implement. And then later we go to the assertions. And you will say, okay, Nacho, but then in this case, if we only have this code, the rest of the things are going to be, let's say my IDE will tell me that this is not working. Yes, that's true. That's exactly what I want. I don't want to do anything else out of what I want as the test tells me. So in this case, I have this state that is not in this case is not defined already, and same for the previous state. What I have to do is understand where the state comes from, and the same from the previous state, because I already know the objective of this test. What I have to do is to declare this expected state, let's say, and the same from the state. So basically, what I have to do is to trigger the code, retrieve and run this code and see what the state I'm going to check, and then define this previous state. So in this case, what I'm doing is going from bottom going up, which means I already know what I'm going to do and then fulfill all the steps. And then the last step is basically having this picture. What I need to do to have everything already connected is to do the setup. What I need to do if this case is calculator is working as expected. Okay, we will probably have to mock this repository because I need to do some behavior. And in this case, do this result on this other result. But this is basically the setup. I already specify the definition, I already describe what I want, and then later on define, let's say, the assertion that I want to check, and then later on going up. So basically the assertions and the orders are in that case like this. So at the end where we are, I'm gonna try to show you a live coding example. And yeah, I normally, well, live coding examples are always nice, but it happens that from time to time, I updated some library, I get a new plugin, whatever, and then something is gonna work. So please keep in mind this in case something is failing. But yeah, let's try to do this, okay? Yeah, I'm gonna explain you a kata that I prepare. Basically, is a recommendation service, and the idea of this service is that let's imagine that you already join a company that is dedicated to sell and rent auto films over the internet. And our bosses told us that they want new functionalities based on building a new service that will help us to return the recommended films. So as you can see here, the list of films that we have to return, they have to be, let's say, linked to a particular genre. And the overall result must be ordered according to a particular average rate, given that the films are the users. So the users will tell us if, I don't know, a film they like, there's a 10 or a 9 or a 7, and then probably we can order it by average rate. And also a film will contain at least some properties like the IDE, the title, the year when it was published, some tags, and some genres. And here we can also see some example that our colleagues or bosses told us, which could look like this. Okay, so if you understand, let me grab some water. I'm going to continue opening my IDE. Hope it is clear. So let's start creating a new project. So this is a recommendation service, right? So let's call it like this: film recommendation. Wow, recommendation service, right? So let's move the ID here because it's opening another desktop. I hope you can still see my screen, and I'm going to increase a little bit the font size. If you cannot see anything, or please let me know, because otherwise I'm gonna be working completely blind. So yeah, I normally start with a project. Let's imagine that we are starting with this project like this, and I'm a little bit picky when I start working with some Java projects. And one of the things that I like the most are using some of the libraries I normally use for checking, verifying that some results are expected as I want, and also as well I like to use some other libraries for mocking. So basically, I'm gonna put it here that dependencies that are gonna be the ones that I need for my cases. So in this case, I'm gonna just remove those dependencies, as you can see here. And yes, I'm gonna use those dependencies. That includes basically JUnit 5. Those are the things that I need, and Mockito and AssertJ. As I mentioned, I normally use some of these libraries, for validating some results. In this case, I recommend to use AssertJ, and for just checking that some results are not, for example, working as expected, or mocking a particular component or API or library, I used Mockito. So once we have that, I think we can see here, I don't have any projects or any code on here. So let's start with that. How we should start? Of course, we are going to start with a test. And with using that, I'm going to start creating the recommended approach, which should be creating a test for this service. So film recommendation service should, right? As I commented, I normally use this approach for creating my unit test or my test. And then I'm going to think about creating this test. So let me go back for a second, and let's remind us what our managers want. So they want to have a service that returns a list of films that are associated by a particular genre, and by default, the result must be ordered according the average rating given to the films by the users. And here we have an example. Okay, so we can actually follow that example and see. Let me go back for a second and see the signature, let's say. So film recommendation service basically should return a list, right? A list of films. And we mentioned that they have to be by genre, right? By genre, and also be ordered by average rate, right? So this is the test that we like to implement and see how this works. When this works, actually our work is done. So we'll start with the assertions. I already told you, I'm going to start with the assertions because this is the first thing after describing the test, because this is the thing I expect. So now what we have to do is to describe what we expect with this test. What we expect is that after triggering the execution of this service, I would like to see that actually I can receive a list, and this is exactly the one that I expect. I think this is a valid, let's say, valid verification that we can use for checking that this service is working as expected. So let's do it like this. So film recommendation, Nacho service. When I use this method that I think is film, let's go back, films by genre, right? Genre, they told us also a signature, really nice. And we use that passing this method, this parameter that is the genre, we can actually see that this is actually equal to some expected films, right? This will be nice, because with this approach, I will say that we are safe creating this mechanism, this test, this method, and also that the behavior will work as expected. And this approach, I think we can, let's say, continue. As you can see, my ID is telling me, hey, I don't know, Nacho, where this film recommendation service comes from, and also as well, these expected films. By the way, one comment on top of that, I'm not going to use right now and put the name of the package. I'm not going to use Git in this approach because of this, it will take much more time on the demo. But of course, you can do all of these things and then commit every single step and then see how your list and your story about the things that you have done are always covered by this, which is really nice. And you can always commit every single change step by step. So in this case, I don't have these expected films as well. I don't have this film recommendation service. What we can do? Well, basically, I would like to have my, let's say, library. My IDE is going to tell me how to do that and then create the test. So let's do it in that way. I'm going to create that variable, sorry, something like this. So film recommendation service, yes, that's correct. But I don't have it. Yes, let's create it. So this is a test. No, this is production code. So this is going to be the service that we would like to implement. Let's put it in that way, and I hope you can see it properly. On the right, I will show you the production code, and on the left, I'm going to show you the test code. Right? I don't think we need right now the three files, but you can see they will be on the left. So yeah, I have here my recommendation service, and here as my ID is telling me initialize it. Yes, I'm going to initialize it. I don't want to worry right now. I would like to start by writing my test first, and then we will see how we can finish that. So this is not already implemented. Let's start with this. So let's finish the test. And as you can see, this is a list of films, right? So this is something that I need to do. I need to implement, and I have to describe. So here I have a film, and you know the film has something that is production code, because I have to write it and deliver it to to our colleagues, to our managers. So I still is not finished my test, and I have to work on this. I'm using Java 17, by the way. And I have to still to finish that. My IDE is telling me still, okay, this is not still finished. And still, I don't know what is this film general method come from, because from the film recommendation service, this is not working. So still the test is not finished. Let's create that method. And no, IntelliJ, this is not correct. This should be something like this. It's a list of films I have to return, and this have to be the genre, right? So now I still don't have. Now I finished, let's say, compiling my test, and it looks like something that I was expecting. No? Before doing anything, let me static import this, and probably we can save some space here. So let's try to execute that and see what is going to happen with this test. So this test is not going to work because, well, Java is telling me, hey, of course, this is not going to be executed because the service is not initialized properly. Okay, let's try to solve that by creating the service. Let's execute again. Now still I have a test that is telling me that is executing something, and then I'm going now to the service, but of course it's not implemented. It's not actually solving the problems that I have. Okay, so now there are many things that we can take into account. For example, this test is helping us to design the solution, but still here, I don't want to check a list of films with a null value. I think it's not a valid example where our managers are expecting a list of films that could be valid. And in those cases, we can actually order in one way or another, but basically we would like to expect a valid list of films. So what we can do is to create a list of films and check that the result is the one that we expect. So for doing that, we can create here some films that could work in those cases. Just to save some time, I don't want to, let's say, waiting and leave you waiting by creating some boring code, right? So this is an example of code that I normally have here, some examples, and you will see how this looks like. So for example, here I have two films, and I think this is a perfectly valid example where I can have two films that I like very much. One is Matrix, and the other one is Star Wars, the fourth episode. I definitely recommend you watching those two movies, to be honest. But this is the code that I think it makes no sense to write it by myself. And I think it's perfectly fine to do to use it in an example. Please don't copy paste code, but in this case is for saving the amount of time dedicated to this demo. But yeah, this is the example that I want to do, and then I'm going to use these constants here, right, to describe and to use this in this test, as you can see here. Of course, this is failing because the film code, production code, still don't have the definition that is correct. If you want to follow me, I'm gonna copy this definition that is basically a record, Java record, and basically, as you can see here, I don't have anything really complicated. The record, it describes and contains only the properties that our colleagues or managers told us. It has to be an ID, a title, a year, the list of tags of the film, and also the list of genres. Nothing really complicated, and this is exactly what we did here, creating two instances of this record, and then use it properly. So here now my test is having a much better look because I have real data, or at least data that I expect when running this test. So let's execute the test again. And as you can see, the results should be the same. That is, this is executing an exception. And basically, it tells me as a developer, this is not already implemented because it's not already, I haven't done anything. Now that we are in this location where we can see that this test, it looks much better for me. And I think I can use it for describing, and it looks for me much useful than before. And now I can have a better understanding of, okay, what we can do here. What we can do is to see which kind of the solution we would like to approach here. I can return here a list of films that could be hard-coded as we have here, and then this test will pass. And actually it will pass, it will work, but in the purpose of this demo, it will not be enough. What we want to do is to actually, let's imagine that we are working on a real production code and we like to do something else. Of course, what we want to go is to retrieve the list of films from some places. Probably, I don't know, probably many of you are using APIs and accessing databases. Let's imagine that our managers came to us and says, okay, this is the list of films are gonna, you have to retrieve it from a database. In this case, we can use another component for retrieving and having access to this database, and then retrieve the list of films, and then cover it and return it via using it and returning via this service. So if you agree with me, then we have to use something here that will be this repository to return and have access to the database, return it back, and then give it back to the service that we are implementing. So in this case, what we can do is to call directly the film repository, right? And then just execute the code that we expect in the way that we think. For example, let's imagine that we have the repository and then execute it like this. If we pass this genre here, and then as we know, they commented in our case, they have to be ordered by average rate, the repository in the future. Now we are designing the solution. Probably the repository in the future will have not only this sort order that we have right now, it have to be as well another kind of order. So that's why now, while I'm working on the test, and now I'm designing the solution, I'm expecting that in the future, I'm going to have another kind of sort order. That's why I'm adding and passing it through here. So this parameter. That's why here, if I found this solution good enough, and I think it could work for us. At the end, what we are doing is delegating the responsibility to connecting to the database to this repository. And this repository, using these two parameters, is going to give me the result that I expect. So let's see if this could work for us. I think it could work. Now what I have to do is to create these things that I don't have it right now. So the destination package, as I mentioned, I'm not going to dedicate so much time on this. If we go back here, I'm going to create this enum that it has to be here as a new constant on this enum. And here, I'm going to use this film repository. You will say, okay, I don't have this film repository. Let's create that film repository. Right? So this is the film repository. And then what I have to do is to create that class. And it has to be a main Java. Of course, it's just production code as well, right? And here, I'm going to create that method that is still not created. So as you can see here, my ID is helping me a little bit. And this is the sort order, right? So let's see if I execute the same test again. Okay, it's telling me it still is not working because this repository is null. Of course, it's null because I haven't, let's say, initialized it properly. How I should initialize it? Okay, that's what if I try to inject it properly via my constructor of my service? Using a dependency injection, we can pass it through the constructor, and then it should work. As you can see, my IDE is now telling me, hey, you have to pass it also on the test as well. And here we can think about how we are gonna define this repository. I can just create this repository here and then execute again. Of course, I'm not changing anything because the film repository is not initialized as I'm passing it through here, and this is not initialized. Now, what we can do is to think about how we are going to solve this, how we can solve this test. One of the things that I don't want to do now that we are working in a unit test is to connect to a real database. That would be a value, right? To connect to a real database, to retrieve the information from a real database, and then implement it as expected. But here I'm talking about a unit test. It's a short unit test. So that's why I don't want to connect to a real database. I prefer to mock it now, and then later create the test properly to check that my repository is working as expected. So in this case, what I can do is to mock this repository. Let's imagine that I'm not having still the database, and when the database is already defined and I have already access, when this is working, I can go to the repository and check that this is working as expected. So here, as I commented, I can do something with the repository saying, okay, I can do something with the repository, and when this 5 by gender is working as expected, like this, and is using the sort order that I expect, then what I want to do is to return this list of films. As you can see here, this list of films are the ones that the repository should return. So when I do these kind of things, and then when the film repository is initialized properly, let's move it here to right a little bit, the film repository will work as expected. This is not going to work. Let me check again. But if I'm not wrong, still is not working because the film repository is still null. Why is null? Because here I have initialized it. How I should initialize it? I can use Mockito for that. Basically, I'm using here Mockito to define the case where the repository is going to behave in that behavior, and I have to initialize it properly. How to do it? I can do this annotation like this here, and then on the perspective of doing the proper annotation using JUnit, Unit 5, I have to execute it and put these annotations in place. Now, as you can see, the service is already done, and it's done working as I want. Let's say that now the business should be working when the repository is done, or the implementation on the connection to the database, etc., is coverly proper by the repository. So how I can continue now? Yes, you guessed it. I have to create a new test for that. So let's create a test for that, right? Now, instead of creating a new unit test, what I want right now is to create an integration test. I would like to connect to a real database and see that the connection to the database is working, and the execution about connecting to the database, getting the information in a particular order and filter it properly is working as expected. So let's do it in that way. How we can do that? As I mentioned, creating a test. How this should work? Well, just return films, right? Filtered by genre and order it, right? Because we mentioned that we passed this ordered here. So let's put the order it properly, right? Okay, I commented before, we have to write the assertion first. Let's do it in that way. So when the film repository and then is calling this 5 by genre, and we can use the same science fiction. And I expect here the sort order. I expect that the result should be equal to the expected films, right? And let's do this. Still is not defined, so I cannot minimize this. So as you can see, my IDE is telling me this is not not working because it's not finished. So let's start with this. Let's finish the test. So first, this should be a list of films, right? Yes. Yes, I have to initialize it, don't worry. And then here I have to import that class. Again, here I have a variable that is not defined. Let's create that local variable. They have to be like this, and let's initialize the property, the repository like this. If I try to execute that test, you will see that it still is failing, of course, because I don't have the film repository initialized property. So as I commented, I would like to have here, possibility to connect to a real database and to be able to, with this, to drive the implementation of this, right? So for doing that, I'm gonna, let's say, connect to a real database. And one of the best ways to doing that nowadays, is to use a library named test containers. Probably many of you know. For the ones that doesn't know, is basically a tool that can give you the possibility to boot up a Docker image, where you can define which kind of image you would like to execute, and then later on, you can basically execute against that container your test. And this is really great because it means that by adding a dependency and defining properly the setup, I can execute my integration test without no problem. And this is exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going to define the dependencies here. As you can see here, I only have a few dependencies. One is the test container version. Another one is the connection pool I'm going to use. I'm going to use Hikari for that. And also the database I'm going to use. In this case, I'm going to use Postgres as a database. Let's imagine that in our case is working like this. In our team, our managers told us that we have to use Postgres. And with that approach, I can basically go here and define the connections and the need for connecting to a real database. And for doing that, I have to do some setup. That's true that I have to do some setup because Postgres and test containers must have to initialize properly. Let me show you in a big picture. So this is the code that we have to use. Basically, we have to define the container, the version of the image that we like to use. As you can see here, we're going to use Postgres, that version. It's not that important. Here we have to expose the port for be able to Java code to connect to that port. And also with this script. Will be the definition of the database that we have. Let's imagine that our team already told us this is the script or the database model that you can use. And with this approach, you can use it for your test. That's nice. Then we have to start the Postgres Docker image. And then later on, with this approach, we can connect to the database, getting the connection, and then use this data source for connecting to the database. So if I try to run this test right now, you will see it's taking a bit more time. I don't know if you noticed, but it took like 2 seconds and something. And it took a little bit more because the test container is doing its work and basically is trying to start up a new Docker image. This is great because it's telling me I cannot find this script. And with this script, you cannot execute something without the definition of these databases. Okay, now is the time for, imagine that you have still working in that company and your colleagues told you, hey, this is the script of the initialization of the database model. I'm going to share it with you, but you will see that it's not that difficult. Let me a second explain it. We will have different tables for different purposes. Really, nothing really complicated. So from one side, we will have the table of films. The list of films will be saved here. Here we will have the list of users, and we will have another table where we have the relationship between the table, the users, sorry, the films, and the average, the rate that every single user will see, will share. So basically, from one side, all the users, you can see here, John, Mike, Luke, is not really important. And here we have some films, right? So you can see here, we have, for example, Matrix, Star Wars, and App. And on the right, you will see here, the last value are the genres. So you will see here, science fiction, right, are in both cases, in the both films, appearing in Matrix and Star Wars. But of course, Up is another great movie. I like it very much, but it's not really a movie about science fiction. So that's why it doesn't include the genres. It's really nice because with this set of values, we can execute them against this database. We're gonna start in a second, and you will see the result. So here we have also the rates. Basically, John, like Matrix, as put it at 8. Here we have Mike, put it at 9. And also we have Luke that put an 8, so more or less 8.3. And here we have only one vote for Star Wars, and it's a 7. So first should appear Matrix, right? And the other one, the second one, should be Star Wars, because even Up has a better high-end rate. It doesn't include, as I show you, right, the science fiction tag. So it should not appear on the result. So let's copy here this, let's say, setup, and use it as a test result. Is the definition of our database is here. So let's try execute this again. So remember, executed this, it took like 2 seconds and something. It still took in 2 seconds. Now, still the result is similar. The film repository is empty. Okay, it's null, sorry. So let's initialize it properly. And to initialize it accordingly, what we have to do is to use this data source. We can see here that we have the data source, but it's not used actually by the film repository. Let's pass it through the data source, and then let's be able, as you can see on the right, let's be able to use it properly. Here, I don't want to do something with this. I only want to assign it to a proper field, because then we will be able to use it via the film repository. So let's execute the test again. In theory, now it will take a little bit more time, even 2 seconds and something. Okay, so here we have still the result that this is something that is not working. Now, what I want to do is to trigger this execution, this code that we have to do here with the minimum approach. In this case, if you think about it, what we have to do is to basically, based on this script and this definition that we have here, is no more than doing a join between the tables that we have here, films, users, and ratings, and to select the ones that have the rate ordered by rate, by average rate, well, for the ones that have still the genre that we already know, the science fiction genre. So in this case, and just for not saving, sorry, for saving some time for the demo, I found here that it should be filtered, right? We have to execute some code here that will actually help us to drive a solution. In this case, it's a matter of executing a SQL where we can join the tables, ratings, users, and films, filter those films by the genre accordingly, and then execute the average rate. I think for the purpose of this demo, it's not required to spend some time on this. And I can show you one possible solution for this is basically, as I mentioned, executing a SQL where we can see all the fields that I need, including the average rate, right? And also doing a join here where I can link the fields from one side and the fields from other side, and then group them by the amount of items that we have, and then order properly for the average rate for the field that we have to order properly. And then with this execution, this return the result and then read the fields. So basically mapping the results of each record that we retrieve from the database to the proper field, basically retrieving the column from IDE, the title, the year, the tax, etc., etc., etc. Nothing really complicated. As I mentioned before, if you can leave me the opportunity, I will copy paste this just to notice, just to save some time, but I will not recommend you again to copy paste a lot of code. But just in this case, let me copy paste here the result. And you will see here, the method is exactly the same. I did it in purpose just to save time for the demo. And in theory here, the signature should look like the same. If I execute this test now, it's taking a bit more time. No, still no. So average order. So I forgot something because this sort order should be the average rate. So this has to be the order that I pass it through. And the average, sorry, it's not average order, it should be average rate as the definition, right, of the presentation should be ordered by the average rate. My fault, sorry. So let's execute the test again. And now it was null because of course I haven't finished this test. As you can see here, the list of things that I expect is null. This is not correct at all. I can do one thing just for saving some time. This that I have here are the list of things that I was expecting, right? So what I can do is to move them and then use it on the same test. Let's do that. So what I can do is to create a new class that gets saved those constants as a field, as an object model. It's a typical pattern where you can save typical constants from one class to another, and then it could work for, in this case, for this purpose. Is test code? Yes. Is not exist? Yes, please create that. And as you can see, my ID is actually moving. It already moved those constants. So let's execute the code that I changed. That is also the test. The test is still working. Let's go back to this test. That is the one that I was expecting that it wasn't working. And let's create that. Finish creating that test. So it should be Star Wars. I don't remember exactly the name that I put it. So let's see here if I can do that like this and do something like this as well, just by adding Star Wars, right? And now if I execute that test, we should see that it's working. Yes, it is working. Basically, I executed an integration test that is helping, is already solving the issue. And at the same time, I have already the service that is already implemented. And I rifle the solution by executing the test first and designing the test first. What I can do last is to execute all the tests by having a look on the coverage. So I cannot see it right now. Yes, here. I'm executing all the tests by the code coverage, and then we will see the result. See it in a second. Yeah, here. So as you can see, this is the result of the code coverage that I have. And this is as a, let's say, as an external result, I have almost 100% of the code is already covered by this. As you can see, the field recommendation service and sort order is already covered, but we have here some lines on the repository that are not covered. Let's have a look and see which ones are not covered. On the left hand, you can see here on the green where the tests are already covered, where the code is already covered by tests, or code or test code already passed it here somewhere at some point. But as you can see here, there are some places where the tests were not covering this area, of course, because we haven't executed something that could trigger an SQL exception and the similar thing in this case. We can try to create some tests for that, but depending on your scenario, in your case, could make sense or could not make sense. But as you can see, the result is really nice in terms of percentage of code coverage that we have. And with this, I end the demo, I end the live coding session, and I will go back for the presentation. So just by finishing and doing a final recap of the session, I will recommend you basically to, I hope I was able to show you that TDD helps you to design and to develop in a different way, in an effective way, in iterative way faster, and also be able to receive some feedback faster than in another way. And of course, to design solutions in a more modular design. Of course, it's difficult to adapt. I already mentioned some of the issues that TDD has, and its mechanic is from time to time difficult to maintain, and the practice is difficult to start with. But I think it's worth to try. Your software at least is going to have less bugs, and it's going to be easier to maintain, which is also nice on the experience to work with others, that your code is easier to maintain or easy to change. I share with you some of the tips. I hope some of them you can apply, and then you can, let's say, see if they're working for you as they're working for me. And yes, I commented already, try to pair with somebody else. It will help you a lot to do the steps step by step, to understand all the process, and also to not jump on the solution directly and jump and go to the, let's say, the solution and the expected result that I mentioned. And of course, practice, practice, and practice again is not something that you might go in one day, but probably you have to realize that it's like driving a bicycle. You have to start realizing it until you get used to it. And yeah, this is it for the session I would like to share with you. I hope you enjoyed the session, and then you have some questions.
Right. Nacho, thanks a lot for a great session. Thoroughly enjoyed it. We don't have time for too many questions, but I have just one. In fact, if we have time, we'll take another one. The first question is, it came from 3 participants, is that a lot of the times, we see code where there are a lot of trivial tests written. So what is the exact balance? How do we strike the right balance between writing too many tests versus writing too few?
That's a good question. Thank you. What I normally do is to see if I have already a test that is covering, let's say, this scenario or this corner case. For example, have you seen that in the demo, I haven't used any null verifications against anything? Null doesn't help me a lot. Normally, I can see many code bases that are checking if null is something, if null is not something. Null is not helping me, for example, to driving, in this case, the solution going against a possible implementation. So it's always a balance between what you want to implement versus the cases that you want to describe. I could actually add some list empty, some list with null values, etc. in this example, but of course, it's not something that is going to help me, in this case. So it depends actually on how many cases you would like to trigger and how you would like to design your solution. I don't see the value of adding some extra conditions or extra verifications if with one check, one test is working for me. In the case, in scenarios like this, you don't need to check if the list was empty, was not empty, was in the. I already define everything by one step, expecting the that I was expecting with the values I was expecting. So for me, it's always the minimum, the best. But of course, it depends on how you can trust the actual code that you are triggering, for example.
Right. And then, the what if, the other question is, if we have to implement TDD in a project that's already underway, and then, you have some parts of the code that do not have the TDD implemented and some parts that do. So how do we ensure that that's set up?
That's a good question. The thing is that I would say majority of us, of all of us, we rely on code that is already adding some value to some others, right? So it depends on how you're trusting the things that you don't know to put effort on that. A majority in my case, in my career, I found scenarios where I didn't knew that something X was going to happen. And that's why I normally try to do a minimum, at least adding some tests in my case, where I understand what is going to happen, and then try to move the problem away of my understanding. If I know that this behavior is already covered by this particular scenario, I know at least that this corner case is already covered. The thing is that many of the code that I found is not really well designed to be testable. And this is another approach. You might need some effort, depending on the project, on the area, to add effort on add tests on that. And it means designing solutions that could be testable. Could be that your test is really coupled with other third parties, whatever. Probably what you can do is to put a layer on top of that, and then slowly add tests that could verify that the element that you are adding is not breaking anything out of the context. And then slowly moving the things on another layer. So depending on your context, it would be really difficult, but there is always a way if you work with legacy code, to introduce new elements that do not change the behavior, that or behavior that you have, but also can help you to verify that the expected behavior that you are going to do is already doing. For example, returning a specification that you expect, returning a contract that you expect, or just doing the math that you expect. And with this approach, you can actually clean, let's say, the actual production code and adding the test where you don't know or in the areas that you don't know. So yes, it's not so easy, but it's a matter of working and creating the test that you might need for doing this legacy part and understand what is going to happen in any case of corner case or a scenario.
Right. Thanks a lot, Nacho. I think that brings us to the end of the session. Thanks a lot for doing a great session. And the really interesting part about it is you didn't gloss over the challenges of implementing TDD, right? So I mean, you covered enough about the challenges that come with implementing TDD. That's very useful for programmers, no doubt. And the code walkthroughs have been excellent. And then the advice that you shouldn't copy, right? So there's a very strong temptation for programmers, to copy and paste. Yeah, I mean it improves the speed of their work, but yeah, introduces all sorts of problems. Yeah, I mean that is golden advice. So thanks a lot for doing this session, Nacho. Really enjoyed it. It was very immersive, like I said, very practical. We can't thank you enough for doing this with us today.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.
Yeah. So have a good day, and we'll connect soon again.
You do.
Bye-bye.
Bye.